Hello everyone out there. Welcome to our fifth and final Screenside Chat here for Coursera Myth. We've really enjoyed this semester, such as it is. Just to refresh your memories, I'm Carrie. Carrie Mowbray. I'm on the course design team here at Coursera. And hopefully you all know us by now, but...
I'm Caroline Whitbeck, also course design team of Coursera Myth.
And I'm Kat Gillespie, also part of the design team.
And Peter Struck.
Last but not least.
Yeah.
So we've really enjoyed all of your weighings in on the discussion board, all of the interaction and the back and forth. And to be honest, we weren't sure sort of how this would go before we started it. This is a brand new project for us. It's very exciting. We've all taught Myth in sort of brick and mortar settings, so taking it to the next level and expanding our audience to 55,000 of you and worldwide is just an amazing opportunity. So definitely thank you for being on board. It's sort of a multi-step process of the video lectures, but that's just the first step, and we didn't just want it to be us talking to you from a can. So I think what really our experience was the interaction with all of you via the discussion boards, seeing you interact with each other. So sometimes we would be sort of lurking in the background, looking at the Student Myth Lounge, which was in theory unmoderated, but we did also look at that, and then sort of just seeing your ideas and how you were grappling with the text first and foremost, with the video lectures. When you pushed back, that was also very good and gave us food for thought, and also how you dealt with the theories. For some of you, and we've heard this in feedback, you had encountered Myth in certain maybe textbook settings or even read some of the original text, but sort of the added layer of applying the theories and having those in your toolkit really seemed to bring the discussion to the next level. So we're very pleased with our interaction. We hope you have been also similarly excited. The chatter on the discussion board has been great, and I'll sort of turn things over to the rest of you to see if you have any thoughts.
Well, I really loved, I know Penn has a very diverse student body, but for the most part in Greek and Roman mythology, even when we've done it on a different online platform, it's mostly an undergraduate student body. You might have people, as we had this past summer, we had people at different places across the world because it was during the summer and they'd gone home. But having people in Greece, helping people in the discussion forums with the Greek, even faster than we could do it. It was really, if you want to think about, what it's like to engage with the divine, it's like engaging with this, electronically enabled mass of minds working together. And even from week one, I was so impressed to see, I remember some of the really early threads tackling some of the really big issues of, comparative religion and mythology. You guys just went, from day one, the confidence that you all brought to discussing these ideas respectfully and helpfully, and people would link and cross-post things, and really, you guys get a round of applause for being your own teaching team to some extent. We helped out where we could and where we could go behind the curtain and tweak, but really, I was impressed with both, the helpfulness of this group and the willingness to engage in these communities that were sort of fabulous, buzzing, protean, interesting, engaged. We have Jungians, we have Catholics, we have grade school students, classicists. It's a wonderful, really, for me to hear back from all these different groups of students that I wouldn't normally in my university life necessarily always get to talk with. So that's been awesome.
Yeah, the geographic and age difference and levels of previous familiarity with myth and education have all been just fascinating.
Yeah. I would just add one other point, in that I think we've been blessed with a very open classroom, in that we have, a 15-year-old who's reading aloud the Odyssey to her dog, and we also have a woman who's working for the UN, and we have a neurosurgeon, and we have people who have taken Latin and Greek since they were younger than we are, and people who are engaging with these myths for the first time. But you don't always know that right? You see all these names and you can respond to any of these forum posts in a way that has both positives and negatives, but one of the greatest positives is that there's no intimidation factor that I think a lot of times will happen in university settings, that students don't always come to office hours because it's can be really frightening to see the professors face to face and really be asked those big questions. But to put out an idea on those forums and just see who picks up on it has been really inspiring for me, and really I think one of the greatest advantages of these sorts of platforms. And y'all have been very open about sharing your ideas and also giving suggestions for next time, which I think is also very helpful. So that's my 2 cents. I in teaching the class there were lots of things that we had to learn, and one piece for me as someone who was delivering these lectures to you is to get used to staring at a piece of glass. And that's actually what I'm doing right now. It's just a little plastic camera with a piece of glass on it, and then behind me is behind all of us right now is a big table of green. It looks like we're up on top of the city of Philadelphia, I think. But to have a classroom that's all green and a class full of an audience that's only a piece of glass, it's a challenge. So we're trying, and we're learning things. And all your comments have been really helpful in us piloting out what the potential of this medium is. I come into it, and I think I'm at the early stages with great enthusiasm and a decent amount of skepticism too, to see what we can do here. The experience that I've had in this class has made the skepticism just decrease quite a bit. I think depending on how I compare what we're up to, it may not be that I get exactly done what we get done in a seminar with 5 people in a closed classroom here, but boy, there was a lot going on out there. You all showed the wheels were turning, no question. And the most important thing I think that any professor can do, at least in my field, is to get people excited to spend time with those really smart people in our class: Homer, Hesiod, Sophocles, Aeschylus. And obviously you all did that. So working through these readings, showing the mass, the aggregate kind of experiential life-changing that was happening out there was really inspiring. So I'm inspired, and it's been, we'll look forward to doing it again at some point in the future. I'm not sure when, but we'll look forward to doing it again at some point. All right. Well, thank you for that. I think more maybe getting into the meat of weeks 9 and 10 for a few minutes. I had a couple questions that came out of these forums, particularly about this idea of the Aeneid as very pro-Augustan or not. So this is a question that was originated by Maria Athanasiou, and she wonders whether Aeneas is even supposed to be a portrait of Caesar Augustus himself. And a lot of our students have been responded with a very primarily pro-Augustan take on Virgil's Aeneid, and I was wondering if you could either build a little bit more on that or weigh in on some of these other issues that maybe didn't come up in the lectures as such.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. There's 1 or 2 things that I've already seen percolating on the boards that are important that are really useful to bring to this kind of general conversation about the relationship between this epic and Virgil's purposes and Augustus and his political purposes. And the relationship is somewhat complex. There is a standard, I think not all that thoughtful view out there that this is kind of a propaganda piece for an Augustus's political program, and that doesn't quite work, I don't think. I mean, propaganda is something you can spray paint on the side of a bus, and I've never seen anyone spray paint the Aeneid on the side of a bus. Where Virgil was with relation to the program that Augustus was setting out is also a complex question. I think there was a deep sense that the Romans needed a new sense of Romanness, and Virgil was happy to pitch in there. One piece of the story that I tossed out a couple of times in lecture, but has some further things to add. Virgil has Aeneas exit the underworld in the middle of Book 6, right at the centerpiece of his epic, via the Gate of False Dreams. this is just after he's laid out this programmatic history that leads to Augustus as a perfect culmination of all things. That's significant. We need to probably also bring in a historical fact that Virgil wished upon his deathbed that the Aeneid be burned. Well, thank goodness it wasn't, and it survives. And it was pointed out on the boards that there are lots of half lines, so there are a couple points at which it was unfinished. But it was an epic that, if we follow Virgil's own purposes, he didn't want it out there. We don't know exactly why, but we do know that that was his dying wish. So we need to bring that to any conversation that we would about Virgil in his relationship with Augustus. And I know that there'll be more for us to talk about on that too.
I mean, I've seen, I wish I could remember the name of this scholar, who wrote about Troy being sort of the great unconscious that follows. So I know in talking about in the lecture some of the teleology of the movement forward, we've been noting some of these moments, these sort of glances back, and I feel like thinking about where we respond and where we see the moments of emotional sort of rupture through what is otherwise, an arc that we see conceived of and theorized as having a certain theoretical and rational, and I must do this and I have to do this, and so I'm doing this, but where we're feeling those impulses back and sort of haunted by, to some extent, there's a loss at the core of this, and whether you see sort of Troy being the emblem of that sort of loss that you can't really shake. We saw it, the loss of Creusa. You saw it a lot at Dido. I know there was some work on the boards regarding Dido and how, and I know in the lecture about how she was portrayed. And I think if you want to think about those moments as offering a chance for saying this is all Rome, we're going forward to Rome. It isn't really, and that's what propaganda would be. It would be a slogan, it would be a jingle. And if there are these sort of moments that you clutch and you stop and you wonder if really we should have gotten to Rome. Well, we had to, we did. That's good. What happens to those other possibilities? I mean, this is where I see Ovid, who is such a totally different creature, but I see him as being literally like a hyperlinked text at those points where you can follow all those possibilities joyously, ecstatically, fully. You drop through the trap door of them into fabulous basements of fantasy. Virgil, you almost can feel that there's a trap below it and you're not going in, but I think those are the moments where you want to think how that might affect any sense of it being just a glossy surface of propaganda.
And that's what poetry really does, is in its subtlety, it can sort of have it many different ways depending on the audience and the audience's preconceptions, political, ideological takes on things, previous familiarity with poetry and with literature. Just to flag one more example of ambiguity, so we talked about the end scene of the underworld with the Gate of False Dreams, but what about going into the underworld, right? So we have the Golden Bough that didn't exactly come off willingly. It's sort of, it needed an extra tug in order to come off. So what does that say? That it finally did release, but it wasn't sort of a,
it wasn't black
just
and
pluck.
white.
Yeah, you didn't just pluck it out of the ground. So that's another sort of example of Virgil really problematizing this forward-looking march to Rome. It's not as black and white as it might at first glance appear.
Yeah. If I might come and kind of bring these threads into a couple of our other forum discussion threads on both, especially women in the Aeneid and the connections between the Aeneid and the Odyssey, which seem very different, but one of the most powerful, I think, observations that has come out of that, and that kind of takes into consideration what Caroline was saying about kind of paths not taken, is this idea that whereas Odysseus maybe left behind children with some of the women on his journey, and that we were reading about in Hesiod and others, Aeneas seems to not do the same thing with Dido. However, in one of the works we didn't read, which is, of course, Ovid's Heroides, these are epistolary poems that are supposed to be letters from these heroines to their wayward gentlemen, say. So you have a letter from Dido to Aeneas, you have a letter from Penelope to Odysseus, etc. Dido, in her plea for Aeneas to come back, says that she is with child. And so she makes the claim that when Aeneas is leaving her to go on his march to Rome, that he's not just leaving her behind, he's leaving behind their child. So when you're interpreting the Aeneid, if we don't have that detail, are we following this kind of straight line path towards Rome, or where are the places where we leave off those suggestions? So that's one of the ways that we might address the issue. One other way in that we have a thread that was started by an anonymous author on women in the Aeneid, but one of our observations from Shelley Anderson was that she reads the Aeneid as a, quote, paean to militarized masculinity, which I think is a fantastic phrase. And I will draw attention to one kind of problematic moment that happens actually in Book 9, which we also haven't gotten to, but I urge everyone to
finish the Aeneid. Virgil didn't finish the Aeneid, but you can finish the Aeneid.
But you can finish what we have. Is that in a moment in Book 9, a soldier called Euryalus has died, and his mother hears about it, and she runs to the ramparts. She's actually essentially on the battlefield, and she begins to wail. And we have this moment where, because of a woman's wailing, because of a woman's lament over one individual child, the Roman or the proto-Roman soldiers become unmanned for war. They become essentially soft. They lose their motivation, and it's has this moment of kind of an anxiety over the influence of women that has an underlying effect, or has the potential to have an underlying effect on these otherwise very men categorized by virtus and all of these kind of masculine virtues. So there are these kind of moments that it wasn't always smooth sailing, that there were places where not everyone can stand up all the time, and Euryalus' mother is swiftly removed from the scene and taken away, and so the men rearm. But it's just one of those moments that I think kind of asks us to read closer.
Nice. Yeah.
So those were kind of my thoughts on the Aeneid. I'm not sure if we have any other closing thoughts, but other things in the forum.
Well, I'd love to get more on the Metamorphoses, and I suppose that we could segue into, we wanted to present to you all what we thought you should read next, our kind of next set of readings. And I would propose that you read the Iliad. There is just so much there. We made references to the Iliad in the class, and need to know some of its background, but the details are just so wonderful. What you have there is the story of the Trojan War, but it's not the story that you might expect if you're not familiar with what Homer does there. It focuses on a very small part of what happened, and it's a exhibition of war rage of one Greek against another. It's Achilles against Agamemnon. Their nastiness, Achilles' nastiness toward Agamemnon, leads to the death of all of his own soldiers, and he seems to be delighting in the death of the Greeks. The Trojans go ahead and play their part and do the killing, but it's Achilles whose drama it mainly is. When he finally allows one different kind of anger to overcome the anger he has over Agamemnon, he jumps back in the battle, but it's not because he ever forgives Agamemnon. It's just one kind of rage overtakes another. And in the end, this rage you just don't know where it's going to go. It's an amazing, amazing epic, so I think you should read that.
What do you think?
Well, if you're reading Homer, you should definitely read, I would say, Gregory Nage's Best of the Achaeans. If you're going to read one piece of scholarship and kind of really get into this issue of what makes a Greek hero, that's one of the most kind of powerful pieces of scholarship, I think, in our generation, that has asked a lot of these huge questions.
And spell his last name, because...
Nage, N-A-G-Y.
It's not intuitive.
It is not intuitive.
And the book is the Best of the Achaeans.
Yeah, so if you're wondering on that aspect, I would turn to him. If you're striving for more of our ancient texts, please read the rest of Ovid's Metamorphoses. It is transformative, as we have found out.
Truth in advertising there.
But it is one of those rare works that has so many stories. And for anyone who's ever seen A Midsummer Night's Dream, we need to know where Pyramus and Thisbe are coming from, where some of these great stories, Orpheus and Eurydice, and a different type of Medea, a different type of Dido, a different interpretation of a lot of these characters that we have seen so far.
Yeah, and Ovid's Metamorphoses he calls a Carmen Perpetuum, a sort of unbroken poem or song. So the way to read it is going, and just letting Ovid take you on this journey from episode to episode in this unbroken thread that he weaves for you. So definitely, some holiday reading would be Ovid. And in case you're a tragedy fan and you haven't gotten your fill of tragedy, and or if you're a fan of Latin and Roman literature, you should also read some of Seneca's tragedies. These are our only full surviving specimens of Roman tragedy. And if, for example, you feel cheated because you didn't get enough Hercules, there's a Hercules tragedy for you about Hercules in his maddened state. You can also read about such characters as Phaedra. You can read a different take on the Oedipus myth, for example. And there's a lot sort of going on with interpretations of Greek tragedies, but also Seneca, an imperial Roman poet, looking at previous Latin literature, so filtering through his Ovid, through his Virgil, and through earlier Roman literature. So definitely, that's my plug.
Yeah, just in time for the holidays. Let's happy families. I know if you're holding up with some eggnog or what have you, and just
yes,
warming your heart. Yeah, that's a good one.
Thyestes we'll learn more about.
Yeah. Building off Carrie's recommendation for more remythologizing, speaking as the comparatist here, I'm going to put my plug out there also for Roland Barthes, his work Mythologies. Barthes was a French theorist, a semiotician, and his work looks at what might be considered contemporary mythologies. So does a particular reading of what myth might mean. He considers it to be a form of language. So he looks at myth in everything from movies to popular advertising. So it's both interesting if you've been interested in some of the theoretical interpretations. I will say he's compulsively readable. So if you're thinking, no, I'm not a theory person, try Barthes on for size. You probably will be a Barthes theory person, if not a normal theory person. And also if you're interested in what myth might mean if there are contemporary myths. It's definitely not just Greek and Roman mythology, but it's mythologies, it's broad, it looks at all different types of cultural artifacts and signifiers. So it's a beautiful, interesting read, and that's going to be that's my recommendation.
Are there, and Barthes, his name is Barthes, Roland Barthes, and it's just mythologies. And are there any other authors whose names we should spell? Oh, Seneca. Well, Seneca, Seneca. And I think that's what we're looking at, right?
Yeah, I think so. Well, one of our questions, I think, in closing is, and thank you for your suggestions on the forum for this last, our Screenside Chat, was to talk a little bit about not only what we got out of this course, but how we kind of got into classics and the study of myth in general, or in the beginning, and from those origins, why we think myth really matters today. So those came up, and they really are the big questions. Not only why we do this, but why what we do matters. So can I throw it to you first?
Sure. So I think for me, one thing is the constant tension between sort of historical specificity and cultural specificity on the one hand, so knowing where these myths came from in as far as we can, trying to sort of retroject and reconstruct how an original audience would have grappled with and encountered these myths. That's on the one hand, but then on the other hand is sort of this enduring relevance and permanence. I mean, myth is continually fascinating. That's why we're all here, and it's not just sort of something that's fossilized and ossified into a particular time and space. I mean, we can continue to approach these myths with fresh eyes and looking at where myth came from and where where it's going, and sort of tracing, kind of like Ovid does, the Carmen Perpetuum, the unbroken line of myth, and really what it means to be fully human, and to engage with art, with the divine, with each other as humans, as we've been looking at these big questions all semester. So for me, as a classicist, those are kind of the two poles that I always try to make speak to each other. And I think that myth is a huge reason why I became a classicist and continues to, I would always love to teach myth. So that's sort of my take.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I feel like I had the sort of the reproduction of the classical education where I was very young and I was put in front of Latin. And working through, I actually found, I've been tutoring a high school student in Latin over the last few years, and I found my high school edition of the Aeneid. And underneath the line where Aeneas is telling his troops, bear up, in book 1, bear up, it'll be okay, perhaps someday even this will be pleasing to remember. And I've highlighted that line and I put a date next to it. Wow. October 15th, 1995, like note to self. And it was such pleasure finding that. And it allowed me that moment of, talking to my 15-year-old self or whoever, and remembering what it was like to be reading this story for the first time, thinking on what stories continue to tell you. So yes, it got to me early, but it's been a continual pleasure to visit it and revisit it, whether it is the marginalia or it is being able to teach it to someone else who's having their first time working with the material and going through the stories and sharing the ideas. And I think for me that's, working particularly with classics as a comparatist, it's been, realizing as I've come up reading all these stories and then seeing them as I read more and more literature where it keeps coming up and being interested to watch where it comes back and how that changes. And that for me is always interesting.
Yeah, I think that relates a lot to how I continue to try and grapple with these ideas of myth, and comes back to our struck addendum that these myths are told by a certain people at a certain time for a certain reason, right? And so when we're retelling myth, we're always asked to revisit why we're telling these again, and what they have to say to a new us, a new reader or a new audience. And when I started thinking about this question, I turned to one of the other translations of the Metamorphoses that we have, and his translation of the first line, this is Alan Mandelbaum's edition, is "My soul would sing" of Metamorphoses. And I think just those words, "my soul would sing," is kind of why I study myth, in that it is not something that is just relevant to all peoples at all times for whatever reason it is, but it actually has the power to touch your soul. And so maybe that sounds a little romantic, maybe it sounds a little far-fetched, but it is a type of literature and a genre and language that has actually affected, me from the very from my earliest beginnings, I guess, of studying those languages. So that would be my take.
Well, the thoughts I have on this, I could go on for some time, but in my own experience, I, as a freshman in college, first really thought about this stuff that we're studying in class together. And it was that experience that just changed me. And it was mostly Homer. Homer just spoke to me. And I knew that there would be a lifetime's worth of work there, and that each increment of knowledge that I was able to pull out of that text would be add to the joy that was possible in that text. And the pleasure of it all, that just was overwhelming to me. It was a more stronger and more intoxicating drink than anything I'd ever drunk. That's true of literal drinks and all the other cultural stuff I'd ever had a chance to be engaged with. So I knew I was lost at that point, and I never really tried to find my way back out of that world. I think I'm more comfortable back there than I am any other place. And the stories, I think, in my own understanding of how myth speaks to us, they speak to us in all the other important ways that it is that we gain our knowledge that go beyond just sheer objectivity. if I were trying to approach the world and trying to understand just only the facts and just objectivity, I think I would probably say that what I've done is create a negative picture of what I expect for myth to be. It's all the other slightly messier, deeply subjective facts of experience that get conveyed, carried, transmitted, retransmitted over generations about this much more complex kind of reality that you and I have entered into, since we're subjects, we're animated human beings. We're making our way from birth to death, trying to figure out what all this is supposed to mean. And whatever truth we're going to find to a question as deep and broad as what it means to be human is not going to, I'm afraid, be objective. There's not a formula that's going to have a simple answer. It's instead going to be a more experiential kind of wisdom. And I don't know any other source that is higher octane engagement in this question of or this kind of wisdom than we're going to find in the myths that we've been reading in this class. I hope you found that too. I've absolutely seen proved over and over again in the kind of ideas you all are sharing among each other on the forums and in your written assignments that you all see it too. Our point here has been to do the best we can to welcome you into a world that is populated by, I think, by my accounting, the greatest minds that I know. And spending more time with them is better than spending time with other lesser minds, including all of us here on the teaching team. Spend more time with Ovid, more time with Homer, and these at the end of that kind of process, we'll all, I think, have a richer understanding of ourselves. So it's been a great pleasure. It's been an amplified version of any other teaching experience I've ever done to 2 orders of magnitude, and that's thrilling for all of us. It's been a lot of fun, and we appreciate your ongoing engagement, not least your patience, and all your hard work over the last 10 weeks. It's inspiring to us. We don't have anything to give you. There's nothing you're getting from us. There's a credential that's out there. There are certificates that through the process of Coursera will be distributed. There'll be announcements that are coming up in the coming weeks as to how those are allocated. But we know that most of you all are here just because you love what we've been doing, and we definitely love that too. So it's been good to get to know you this way. If you ever come to the University of Pennsylvania, stop by and say hi, Classics Department. We'd love to see you. And best of luck in all the different parts of the world where you all are. So,
everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot.